It was a real struggle coming up with even a remotely decent opening line for this review, so let's just dive right on in. Shadow Warrior 3, developed by the Flying Wild Hog Studio, the developers of the upcoming Evil West, have created a game that has more in common with a haunted house than a first-person shooter. A rushed experience that hurries you through boring platforming section after boring platforming section while trying to frighten you with its shallow and flat combat encounters. Now, to be fair, I've had no experience with the Shadow Warrior franchise. I'm no expert on Lowang, but I can tell you this. I was excited for a doomed 2016 pizza topped with a wisecracking gun-touting ninja with some Deadpool-esque one-liners melted over the top. What I got instead was a cold, sloppy base, undercooked and one-dimensional combat with a character that could not shut the hell up, who spewed cringy dialogue wrapped up in a video game that can't wait to show you the credits, and yet drag its feet towards the final act. Let's talk about Shadow Warrior 3 and why it's not worth your time.
1,000-year-old dragon comes fucking flying out!
The graphics are very, very pretty, especially the environments. The world Lowang swings on through is stunningly crafted, and that's the biggest issue. There's no actual downtime, no moments to pause and absorb these gorgeous vistas. In fact, I found it almost insulting. These devs clearly worked hard to produce environments that are worthy of advertising the current console generation, and yet the player gets only a glance as they're whizzed by to the next disappointing encounter. Worst of all, you have no reason to explore. Seriously, any upgrades or weapons are impossible to miss as our hero runs into them around every corner. Linear game or not, even a straight path can have a few branches. Why put the resources into developing these mystical and quite stunning areas if the player doesn't get a chance to enjoy them? Rather than the player exploring the menu for upgrades to Lowang and his arsenal, imagine having a spirit guide, a creature that would force the camera to look out into whichever area you happen to be in. It's a shame. A small change like this could have had such a big impact. As it is, so much love went into something the player never gets to relish. The excellent work continues into the character design, and although I had absolutely zero knowledge of the 4 humanoid characters, their design told me everything I needed to know, something that's always a good mark of a solid designer. The enemies are designed just as well but aren't distinct enough to be unique, and I couldn't help but think that I've seen them all before in half a dozen other games. The moment I stopped playing, I forgot what they looked like, and yet I can remember the look of the enemies in God of War or Doom, games I haven't played in years. Unfortunately, my praise doesn't extend to the animation. The CGI cutscenes are obviously very well done, but it's the endgame cutscenes that really highlight the faults that a lot of devs face. Mouth movement. There's a fine line between having the mouth move a little or too much, and in Shadow Warrior 3, there's so many immersion-breaking moments where a character's mouth was trying to escape their face or the jaw was just simply trying to tickle the model's nipples. Overall, some great highs and disappointing lows.
And I'm sorry, okay? But it's not the best time for an I told you so. I can't find Hoji.
I bugged the mask. The transmitter positions Hoji round that central tree in the forest.
Old habits die hard, huh?
I'm endeavoring to be a better person, not an idiot. Let's meet there. And Wang, leave the talking to us.
All in all, the sound design is pretty good, except for the music. And to be truthful, I actually had no idea there was any music until I scrolled through my footage and realized generic metal track number 1 was playing during every combat encounter. But aside from that, the shooting effects were crisp and really popped into your ears with some fantastic audio feedback. The voice acting is also really good, with the cast delivering an A+ performance. Getting into the combat encounters, there's a lot of reliance on audio cues to alert the player to whichever enemy is attacking at what moment, and they're good, going a long way to help the player in the thick of the often chaotic battles. That is, when you can actually hear them, because unfortunately, despite each individual enemy noise sounding fantastically, Okay, that's a bit hard, a bit too much. They sound good. The audio mix, on the other hand, is just terrible. It's diabolical, with the combat encounters already feeling frantic and poorly designed. The audio cues and general enemy sound design is jumbled and processed into nothing short of audio diarrhea. I want to say the dialogue was bad, and honestly, it's really just C-movie schlock, with Lo Wang being made up of 75% dated one-liners or film quotes. Seriously, no one quotes The Matrix anymore, and having a video game character in 2022 repeatedly comment on situations with pop culture references does very little for the player experience and comes across like a kid trying to be cool and falling flat on their ass.
You're a ninja, Wang, a ninja! A hero! A warrior with a killer six-pack and an ass you could bounce quarters on.
The most insulting moment comes when our main character, who has shown to be nothing short of selfish and insufferable, tries to have the whole humans are just misunderstood speech out of bloody nowhere, and then immediately moves on like nothing happened. The dialogue, it's just so clunky. If the graphics are at the top of the class, then the script is staring out the window, sticking its finger up its bum and blowing bubbles. The story, it's not terrible. It's fine, nothing is breaking the mold here, but even the simplest first-person shooter needs a well-written dialogue to keep even the blandest narrative chugging along.
Huh? And who's got the BFG now?
That's it, brother. We are done. Game over, man. Game over.
I understood that reference.
So, the pacing. Well, it's downright bloody terrible. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being drawn out and bloated, a modern day Ubisoft game for example, and at the opposite end of the ladder, acting as our number one marker is Shadow Warrior 3. I'm deadly serious. This game cannot wait to be over, and still the game drags and just seems to edge closer to the final encounter 3 times, with the last area feeling tacked on with never before seen platforming mechanics seemingly thrown in for added length. If it wasn't for me wanting to be as thorough as possible for this video, then I would never have finished the game. The core issue being the combat encounters. They don't feel meaningful. I mentioned at the start of Shadow Warrior 3 that it has more in common with a haunted house than an actual video game, and it's because you feel like you're just rushed through one combat encounter to another with short, mediocre platforming sections to break it all up. The lack of exploration and freedom for the player contributes immensely to the frantic and unrestrained pace. If the player was given the chance to explore the world even slightly, the chaotic pacing issues would have at least found some peace.
And I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but operating this glitchy equipment seriously sucks ass.
Maybe for humans and their...
There's no mistake about it. Shadow Warrior 3 has looked over Doom 2016's shoulder and copied its homework. Despite getting the feel almost right, many of the core design principles are lacking. Doom 2016 was chaotic, but it was structured. Every system had a purpose and was designed with the other combat and gameplay mechanics in mind. So even when you're in the thick of the firefight, hordes of demons descending upon you, you always felt in control. You knew what you had to do, and most importantly, you knew how to do it. Shadow Warrior 3's combat is chaos for chaos' sake. Sure, you have some nice environmental assets that help you pick off some weaker enemies, but encounters require the player to be constantly spinning and moving around. So even when you have a chance to pop off a chi blast and utilize the environments around you, you'll be too busy darting out of the way of one attack or another. Each enemy variety requires the player to adopt a slightly different gameplay style. Sort of. One demon needs you to pop off a chi blast, expose its core before shooting it up. Another will dig around underground and pop up periodically, only then will you have a chance of damaging it. Still, other enemies float above you, firing off attacks that home in on Lo Wang's exact location, and still others have a regenerating shield, another will bounce around and leave spinning blades in its wake, and if that all sounds messy, you're absolutely right. Combine all that with the player needing to move around at breakneck speeds to avoid taking damage, and to top it all off, The fact I only mentioned half of the total enemy varieties, combat becomes an absolute chore. Let's talk about those weapons. Lo Wang has access to 6 guns, a katana, and gory kills, the latter being a special move that's tied to a meter that builds up the more enemies you kill and then allows you to tear open any demon, gifting the player with a limited time special attack. My favourite were the demon heads, who need to be gently shoved before killing. Their special attack is essentially a disco ball of lasers and death. It was fantastic. But despite being fun, the issue with the gory kills is the default button mapping, L1 and R1 on the PS5. Now, this also opens up the weapon wheel for some reason, and with Lo Wang requiring the player to be directly facing a demon, not a millimeter either side, so I often found myself opening the weapon wheel rather than activating the gory kills. And yes, I know what you're thinking, I could remap the controls, but this was the default. In other words, the way the developers intended you to play. I'm surprised they thought this was fine, and I suppose it would have been if the player didn't have such a small window for activating it. I swear, if you're not looking directly at an enemy, nothing happens. You just stand there with a weapon wheel in your face when you need to be moving around constantly. The slightest pause usually means death. The 6 guns you have access to definitely exist, they just don't feel powerful. The pistol you have at the start of the game will do the same amount of damage at the very end. You do have upgrades, and some definitely did help, but you never felt any more powerful. There was no progression. Even the health upgrade for Lo Wang only gifted the player with 25 more points, 25% of your base health. Shadow Warrior 3 is a power fantasy first-person shooter without the power. I'm not asking for RPG style upgrades or a skill tree, but something, anything that gives you the feeling of finding your mojo, something Lo Wang constantly brags on about in the game. Progression is right there in the story, and yet the very first enemy you encounter still requires the same amount of bullets at the very end. Your katana is just useless, at least useless for dealing damage. A couple of upgrades will allow each attack to give you some health or ammo, but look, it came in handy on more than one occasion, sure, especially with the giant tank enemies rubber banding around the map, but no upgrade in the entire game can help you escape the feeling of boredom whenever you start seeing a combat area appear over the horizon, regardless of the weapons. I mentioned the platforming sections several times in this video, and they're just as bad as I make them out to be. 90% are just boring, just really boring, requiring that same pinpoint accuracy of the gory kills, but this time with a grappling hook, something the game takes a solid moment to make fun of, by the way. Seriously though, you cannot make fun of a mechanic that every other game has, only to incorporate that same mechanic into your game, just worse. As I mentioned, the grapple hook has some serious issues, the same issues the gory kills suffer from. If you're not looking directly at a grappling point, down to the millimeter, you'll just fall to your death. Now the remaining 10% of the platforming sections require the player to see into the future with destructible environments blocking the way. Without prior knowledge of their existence, you will fall again and again to your death. I'm going to leave some footage playing for a bit of 2 particularly annoying platforming sections that had me very, very close to quitting. Minimal to non-existent player progression, tiresome combat, and poorly implemented platforming sections leaves Shadow Warrior 3's gameplay in a fairly pitiable state. Smaller studio or not, this game was 76 AUD on day one, and honestly, it's not even close to being worth that price of entry, costing roughly $15 for each hour of play with no reason for you to ever play it again. To sum it all up, Shadow Warrior 3 is wasted potential personified. A game that had every right to be good, if not great, and took every opportunity possible to muck it all up. From the poor implementation of gameplay mechanics, issues baked so deep into the very core of the game, coupled with horrible pacing and a character who is genuinely unlikable, with side characters who exist only as fan service. And maybe that's it, actually. As Shadow Warrior 3 is my first experience with the franchise, maybe this is what fans want. But I honestly, seriously doubt that. I can't help but feel even die-hard fans would struggle to find anything to enjoy. The story has no stakes, and the only reason to replay the game is to experience the aforementioned issues with spongier enemies. Is Shadow Warrior 3 worth your time? Absolutely bloody not. The 5 or so hours you spend with the game could be spent with another meaningful title or simply doing your taxes. Your time is more valuable than this. Be sure to hit that like button on the way out, hit it twice. If you didn't like this video, let me know what you think of Shadow Warrior down below, and until next time, take care. We'll see you later.
This one looks cozy. Put the egg in there. Time and temperature will do the rest.